Welcome to the People Are People podcast, life lessons learned in real time, where we touch on the crazy realities of dealing with human behavior in the workplace. In 2022, I am presenting a series that I simply call the New Manager Series, where we will focus on a variety of topics every manager needs to know about to be successful during and beyond their first year of management. Being a manager is not always a pretty job. It comes with highs and lows that you must prepare yourself to navigate. In this episode, we are going to dive into the importance of establishing an onboarding program, even as a new manager entering an organization for the first time. So, I have a story to share with you. A while ago, I entered a new position with a new company, and my hiring manager was also new at the time. And so she was trying to really become familiar with the expectations that were associated with her position. And then in the midst of everything else, she was also actively recruiting for people to fill open positions. And so at the time in which I started, unfortunately, there was not a organized onboarding program, which I was really surprised because I had not been in that kind of an environment where there was not something just kind of mapped out for the course of a few weeks and or months. And so I found myself during the first month just kind of floating by day to day and just finding trainings to complete on my own. I was assigned to well, not really assigned. Let me back up. I was kind of linked up with people for 1 week to shadow. But pretty much after that week, there wasn't much to do. And so during the course of my onboarding, one of the people shared with me that the position itself just wasn't really a busy position, which, for me, I wasn't too concerned about that. But what I would say is I was probably more concerned about not really having a organized onboarding program. And so, what I can tell you as a manager who has had oversight of, onboarding new people, coming into an organization, being new, and having to onboard people, and just based on what some of the statistics say about why people leave companies, I want to stress to you as a new manager, or even if you've been doing this for many years, your onboarding program is critical to the success of whether or not you retain talent within your organization, or whether or not you retain the right talent even within your organization. Um, there's so much to unpack in what I'm about to say, so bear with me as I kind of talk through this a little bit, because I really want you to really take seriously how important the onboarding experience is. First of all, as a new manager coming in, one of the first things that you definitely need to be aware of is what the onboarding experience is. And if you are finding that your own onboarding experience is a bit lacking, then you're likely going to need to turn to the people that are there and designate one or two people to put together an onboarding program for you. And that onboarding experience will need to be something that aligns with a day in the life of each role that you provide oversight for. And you will also need to have an awareness, as I've said in many of the other podcasts, you will need to have an awareness for how what it is your team does fits into what it is you do and what your oversight of their work is. Um, you know, if there aren't any workflows that exist, or that you can get your hands on, you're going to need to pull together some people pretty quickly to map out the workflow. You should have a very good understanding for what the workflow is for each person on your team. And this is more for, mid-level managers or individuals who are managing frontline people. I want to stress that. I understand that if you are perhaps more on the higher end of mid-level, perhaps senior level, you could easily be managing, more than 10 roles, right? And while, yes, you probably still should have some oversight or purview of what that looks like, the reality, I get that may be a little more difficult. And again, that's where hopefully you should have a layer of management between you and those frontline employees. But if, let's say, you are it, tag you're it, and you do have 20 people that you are, 20 different roles, I should say, that you have oversight for, then you should definitely get some people on mapping out what a day in the life looks like. Because those workflows are the things that are going to form your onboarding program. Now, in the perfect world, as a new manager, when you enter an organization, there should be some type of onboarding or OJT. And so when I say onboarding, I am not speaking in terms of, the generic corporate type of training that everyone receives, where, for example, you're going to get trained on workplace harassment, you're going to be trained on cultural sensitivity, you're going to receive an overview of, how you get paid and how to submit time for vacation or sick days, that generic stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about the actual on the job training. That should be one of the first things. And usually as a new manager, you're going to quickly find out, how good or bad it is just based on your own onboarding experience. And so if you are finding that you're not really getting what you need to get as a manager to understand what it is the people do that you're going to be providing oversight for, then that's again where you're going to need to just kind of pull people in and say, listen, I'm going to, put one or two of you on mapping out what the workflow is. And then I want you to come back and walk me through what that workflow is so that I have an understanding of it. And that's again, we've talked about early on in the series. This is kind of where you also kind of get to cheat and rapidly assess where the gaps are. Oftentimes when people get the opportunity to help you understand what it is they do, they're often also willing to share what they perceive the gaps to be in that process. So I just want to emphasize that aspect just based on my own experience and, coming into an organization where there wasn't an onboarding program, making sure that you have those workflows will definitely, and that you're talking to the people about those workflows will help you to, again, get a sense of what the job is itself for each of the different roles, and it will help to basically serve as the framework for your onboarding experience. So there is that, right? Get your workflows. Next, this is if there is not an onboarding program, take that information, talk to the people about then using that information to formulate an onboarding program. And you will want to prioritize that work by the roles that you are maybe attempting to fill in real time. It is a pain in the butt when you are actively trying to learn your job and then you've got someone new who's starting who maybe is not familiar with the job itself. And now, you kind of have to worry about what it is they're going to do. And do you understand what it is they're going to be doing fully? So taking that information from the workflows, identifying someone who will have oversight of then morphing it into some type of training. Now, we can do this in an iterative fashion as managers, right? It may not be a pretty package of training in which you've had an instructional designer or learning experience designer, put something together using videos and e-learning and micro-learning types of material. It may be that, you are having to point them to content that already exists for different areas that's informational that, these new hires need to have an understanding for. So you're going to want to, as I said, take your workflows, use that as the framework to then organize some type of on the job training if it does not already exist. And this is going to be training that not only your new hire is going to complete, but it's going to be training that you are going to need to complete, because at the end of the day, as a frontline manager, you should have a very good understanding for what the type of training is, your new hires are going to be receiving, and again, where the gaps are in that training. Again, this is not going to be perfect training, but it will be some form of training that you're going to put together and that you're also going to track as it relates to their progress and how it's going for them. How successful they are in completing the training in a timely fashion, and if there's any supplemental type of activity that will take place as they are completing the training. And so when I speak of supplemental activity, meaning are you going to have these individuals actually shadow people at targeted points within that onboarding experience? Okay. Are you going to have them meet with people weekly to talk through what it is they've learned? Or are you going to, assign them to a specific individual that they're just shadowing all along just for consistency? There's pros and cons to assigning designated preceptors. And I think we've touched on this in prior podcasts, but I will say this, as you're selecting people for your new hires to shadow, make sure they are individuals who are receptive, I should say, to new hires, that they enjoy teaching them new things. And if you find that what your your options are kind of limited, and you're going to be partnering this new hire with someone who maybe is not a people person, then definitely become very focused on what it is you're going to want them to get from this individual that they likely won't spend as much time with as they might someone who enjoys uh, teaching new people new things. The other thing that I want to say about that preceptor experience is making sure that the other individual understands what your expectations are of them. Again, you're brand new to the organization, so it's likely that you're going to be so bogged down with trying to understand what it is you need to know that you're just not going to have a whole lot of time for the other person who is brand new and trying to figure out what it is they need to know, particularly from an onboarding standpoint. As a people manager, you're there to maybe answer or try to answer some of their basic questions. But when it comes to the technical knowledge that they're going to need to be successful, this is where you are going to likely have to rely on a specific individual who can, spend that designated time with them. And then what you should do is charge that person with documenting anything else that they're sharing with this person along the way, so that it becomes accessible to you as another newbie on the team. I think one of the biggest challenges I've seen where people don't have an organized onboarding structure is that you get different pieces of information floating back and forth between an existing employee or preceptor and the new hire. And sometimes that information, when it's not documented in an organized format for the new hire and preceptor to follow, is the information may be inconsistent, meaning everyone is not doing it the same way. Someone may be using a resource that everyone else has decided no longer to use, such as like a service ticket intake type of system. Maybe one out of the 10 are using it, or 5 out of the 10 are using it, but somehow other people did not get the message that they should no longer be using it. You may find that if the organization recently underwent reorganization, that again, there are just some differences or gaps in practice that you're just not aware of. But this new person, unfortunately, is going to be exposed to all of these different ways of doing things. So you'll definitely want to ensure that whoever you entrust your preceptor duties to under this new onboarding program is documenting what it is they are, training people on. Just have them create a separate checklist, for example. We don't necessarily want to bog this person down with copious documentation by any stretch, but, a great way to document what it is they are training your new hire on is to have them just create a simple checklist or a basic outline that captures, what it is they reviewed with that person. And again, this is another way that when you get to phase two, for example, of you developing your onboarding program, you'll have that information that you can then refer back to the workflow on. You can again identify any inconsistencies or gaps, and you can even bring that information back to the group. I think often managers fall into the trap of thinking, well, I'm only hiring these two people. I won't really need this information, an onboarding program for some time. But the reality is that every organization, no matter where you go, is at risk for turnover. And so if for any reason someone leaves, their company, there's a real risk that you're going to have to start all over again with onboarding someone. And wouldn't it be a lot easier on you and the team if you had some type of organized program to help that on onboard? So I just wanted to, leverage this podcast or this episode of my podcast to really hone in on the importance of ensuring that as you're coming on board, if you identified that your company does not have a organized or stable onboarding program for new hires on your team, that you rapidly get something in place so that, whoever's coming through the door feels like, they are needed and that, people are here to help them effectively onboard and that they will be successful in their new role with the company. Finally, do a bit of an after actions review with your new hire, meaning once you feel that their onboarding has wrapped up, pull them into a one-to-one session and just get a good idea from them as it relates to how they perceived their onboarding experience went when it came to their on-the-job training, what recommendations they have to improve it for the next person. And, hey, don't be afraid to enlist them in further helping to design your program. Well, folks, that's all I have for this episode of the People Are People podcast, Life Lessons Learned in Real Time. I hope you enjoyed listening. Please take a moment to share this episode, like this episode. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you in the next podcast. Stay safe.